Hello, mystery seekers, and welcome to the Mystery Served. In his day, Walt Disney came to the big screen by means of revolutionary animation techniques. He produced a large quantity of films. Some thought they were produced by his team. By the team, that is studio, all create the story on its own. But actually, they recycled 19th century classics. Snow White, Pinocchio, The Little Mermaid, The Sleeping Beauty are just a few examples of animated stories that Disney immortalized in films and musicals. Millions of children simply took Disney's word on those stories for granted. Those people and those characters, without bothering to investigate the real sources. Everyone knows that this Greek company has a very rigid formula. It consists in always maintaining the most politically correct position. He remains on a very strict editorial line that tries not to offend anyone. The great irony is that the sources on which many of the famous animated films are based, they are anything but childish. Some are in fact very sinister. They talk about murders, torture, blood. They contain deployment of abominable wickedness. These are just some of the things found in the original version of these stories. The most mystified of all is Snow White. Thanks to numerous modern adaptations, we know that the terrible Queen Grimhilda was much worse than what they showed us with the animated adaptation of 1937. In this film, Disney did something very bold. That is to say that the Queen had commanded to kill Snow White and asked the hunter for the heart of his proof. This is quite sinister and tragic, but it's nothing compared to the original version. The Queen actually asks for the girl's lungs and liver with the intention of cooking them and serving them for the dinner in the evening. The king would have eaten his daughter's organs without his knowledge. All of the pure depraved passion of Grimhilda. Sleeping Beauty in the world is not different. We have all seen the animated film. But in the original version, it is not the kiss of a prince that wakes her from hibernation. A child who does this by sucking one of the fingers by pulling out the needle that kept her in a state of a coma. What happens next is worthy of an horror story. The beauty wakes up to realize that this child is actually one of her two children. At the side you can see an elderly king whom he had met years before. The king had brought her to his castle and raped them. The ensemble of The Little Mermaid is undoubtedly one of the most macabre. To begin with, Ursula was much more terrible in the book than in 1918 adaptation, which is already difficult to accept. The witch agrees to convert Ariel into a human being, but on the condition that with every step she would take with her woman's legs, she would feel as if a nail stuck in the soles of her feet. Ariel accepts this out of love. He cleverly tries to work as little as possible so as not to make himself suspicious of humans, but he will serve them little. The conclusion becomes particularly devastating and mortifying for the reader when the dance scene arrives. And that's not all. Eventually, Prince Eric cheats on Ariel and leaves her for another woman. A girl who is well positioned economically. A human princess. Upon seeing this, Ariel becomes depressed and eventually commits suicide. This example is not the worst in this series because there are horrible things. Pinocchio. Anyone who has read the original book will realize that the main character is good, lovely, full of kindness and benevolent like in the movie. But we start reading the story. We will see that all the worst and worst things can happen to a child happen to him. Everything becomes particularly traumatic when it is converted into a donkey, along with the hundreds of other poor children, abandoned or run away from home. The problem is the brutal fire eater. The problem is a certain subject, the main villain. When one of the donkeys behaved badly or did not want to collaborate, he took out a knife and cut his ears as if it were sticks. Obviously the guy knew perfectly well that those donkeys were children. This review includes one of the Disney most famous films, Cinderella. In the incredible modified version of Disney, we see that Cinderella is a supremely teenager, humble, suffering because of an abominable stepmother and two evil and capricious stepsisters. At the end of the story, the crystal shoes fit her beautiful feet, revealing that she is the chosen one. He married the princess and they lived happily ever after. In the original version, exactly this happens. But with the variant, it turns out that the stepsister used knives and tools to cut whole pieces of their feet with the intention of wearing crystal shoes. They thought the prince would not ever realize it using socks. What they didn't know is the young man counted on the help of two talking doves who warned him of the deception of the young ladies. Soon after, the birds snatched the eyes of the two stepsisters and forced them to lead a life of misery as homeless wanderers in the streets. Although incredible, in times past, society was so different that childhood stories were generally like that. There was another mentality, another way to educate the children, and another way of seeing the reality of the world. I end the video here. If you like it, please put thumbs up and share it. See you at the Neighbor Sincere Mystery server.
Alla fine della storia, le scarpette di cristallo calzano i suoi bei piedini, rivelando che è lei la prescelta. Si sposa con il principe e vivono felici e contenti. Per sempre. Nella versione originale succede esattamente questo, però con una variante. Risulta che le sorellastre utilizzano dei coltelli e attrezzi per tagliarsi pezzi interi di piedi con il proposito di calzare le scarpette di cristallo. Pensavano che il principe non se ne sarebbe reso conto utilizzando delle calze. Quello che non sapevano è che il giovane contava sull'aiuto di due colombe parlanti che lo avvisarono dell'inganno delle signorine. Subito dopo gli uccelli strappano gli occhi alle due sorellastre e le obbligano a condurre una vita di miseria come vagabonde senza tetto nelle strade. Anche se incredibile, in tempi passati la società era tanto diversa che i racconti infantili erano generalmente così. C'era un'altra mentalità, un altro modo di educare i bambini e un altro modo di vedere la realtà del mondo. Termino qui il video e se ti è piaciuto, per favore metti pollice in alto e condividilo. Arrivederci. Da Il Mistero è Servito.